Today we'll be changing the pre-drill router and the plunge cylinders. You're going to need a 3/16 Allen. You're also going to need a 5/32 socket head Allen, a number 4, and a long 3/16, followed by a 1/2-inch socket with an extension. You're also going to need a ball rail clamp with a wrench to clamp that, followed by a thin 1/2-inch plate. You'll also need a torque wrench and Loctite for reassembly. With your machine's air and powered on, you'll want to raise the head from the manual menu. You go to the hinge servo jog, and then you'll want to raise your Y axis. Once the machine is in the top position, you'll be able to work on those router plates. First, you'll want to loosen your rail clamp to be able to fit over the rail. So you slide that over, make sure your bolt is on the exterior side so you can get your wrench over. Then you'll want to tighten your rail clamp against the bottom of the head. Now we're going to release the air so that the head can rest on the rail clamp and we can relieve the router from the cylinder. Always remember to hit the E-stop. The machine is now safe to work on. Now that your air is disconnected, you can freely move your router. This is going to be your cylinder that we're also going to disconnect. First, you're going to want to disconnect these 1/4-20 socket heads with your Allen. Remember to do the bolt on the other side as well. Now that the 1/4-20 socket heads are removed, you're going to remove the 1/2-inch hex head in the back of the plate. You will also need to disconnect power before removing the router. Now you are able to remove your pre-drill router and mounting plate. When removing the routers from the plates, you may need a M5 or an M4 socket to remove the bolts. They may have a socket head or a flat head depending on the router that's used. You'll want to remove all 6 bolts from the router and the plate. This is the point when you would put the motor plate back on with your new router motor. From here on out, you'll just want to reverse all of the steps that we just did for removal of the router motor. Now with your router disconnected, you can disconnect the plunge cylinder. First, you'll want to remove these 3 1/4-20 socket heads. You can then remove the 2 1032 socket heads. Now your plunge cylinder should be free. Now that the plunge cylinder is free, you can disconnect your air lines. You can now remove the plunge cylinder from the router plate. Lastly, to remove this green plate from your cylinder, you're going to need your Fabco 7/16 slip and a 3/16 hex Allen to remove that flathead. You'll also need a 7/16 wrench to remove the air fittings from the cylinder. You're going to want to make sure you torque all of your 1/4-20 bolts to 10 foot-pounds and your 5/16 bolts to 18 foot-pounds. All bolts will get Loctite except for this one flathead holding the cylinder. When reinstalling your cylinder, make sure that your air fittings are accessible to the air lines. And make sure you use Loctite when installing all required hardware.